Welcome back to the fourth episode of the Quantum Business Series. Our guest today is one of the most credible voices in the quantum industry. Mykola Maksymenko is co-founder and chief technology officer of Haiqu, a quantum software company that has raised $11 million from primary ventures partners, Toyota Ventures, and collaborative fund, what proves a founding premise that enterprise value doesn't have to wait until the fault tolerance. Mykola, I'm super happy to have you today here and that we finally sit down to talk about the quantum value for the business.
Hi, Olga. Glad seeing you, and I'm very excited actually to talk to you about different aspects of quantum computing, and particularly practical quantum computing. Maybe just like to give a small note. So overall, we raised 15 million. That was pre-seed and seed rounds altogether. And right now we are well-funded young startup, and we have probably the best technology on the market to move forward.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you for editing this. And Mykola, you have spent your PhD and postdocs at Weizmann Institute of Science and Max Planck Institute on quantum-inspired numerics for materials, networks, and AI. And you also have built and led the SoftServe's deep tech R&D team, about like 100 people. So what has motivated you to start Haiqu?
Right. So quantum computing is like very close to my heart. So I did my bachelor and master degree in the theory of quantum systems and particularly quantum computing. So it's kind of back to the roots in some sense. Also, the kind of research I did in condensed matter physics, it was very close to what currently is important in quantum computing. Particularly, I worked on non-equilibrium quantum system, which is all about decoherence, all about connecting closed quantum system to environment and seeing how it decoheres and how it interacts with environment. So that's exactly what's very important today with the type of qubits that we have. Those qubits are not isolated, they are not perfect, and we need to develop methods to actually make them better and make them more stable.
Yeah, that's an impressive journey, actually. I wanted to start today's discussion with a big strategic question that actually hanging over the entire field right now. So, I would say that we observe two opposite approaches in the quantum industry today. One says wait until the fault-tolerant quantum computers, so maybe 10 years out of now, because today's noisy hardware is not capable of solving commercially relevant problems. However, the other camp says that there is an actual real value that could be extracted from today's quantum computers with the right software layer above them. So I want to ask you directly, Mykola, should companies start with quantum in 2026 or wait another decade for the fault-tolerant machines to be able to deliver production-grade results?
That's an excellent question. So I totally agree about the two camps, and I think I'm actually more leaning towards the second camp, that quantum computing is here and you can already run interesting quantum applications today. However, those applications are very niche. So, for example, as a scientist, I can already execute some simulations on the quantum computer in a more interesting or more exciting, let's say, or convenient way than otherwise I can do on a classical computer. That could be, for example, useful for writing research papers and actually discovering some new science. And my belief is that a few years back, we were not able to do that at all. So today we already are able to simulate something more or less on par of classical systems. And my belief is that we are very close to discovering some of the applications beyond just like deep science or deep niche applications, which we have across many fields, but we will be able to focus on commercializing those in some specific areas of business. And we already see that kind of those hints of this process happening across many different areas. So first people announce like huge quantum advantage result or whatever, and then someone else discovers a better classical method. But it's good that we have that discussion. So just a few years back, there was like no belief at all that we could do anything like that. So I think we are closer and closer to this moment when actually running on the quantum computer will be just more convenient. Maybe it still will not be like the definitive advantage that it will like be impossible to run something on the classical computer in the same way. But the fact that, for example, in condensed matter physics, I can simulate quantum dynamics on the quantum computer easier or sometimes even faster than on a classical computer. That's for me personally, as a condensed matter physicist, that's already quite promising.
Right. And when we were talking about value, let's crystallize a little bit from the business optics, because there is a real difference between few things, right? When enterprises are learning from POCs or pilots, when they're building the internal capability they will be able to use maybe later, and the enterprises that are putting quantum into their production systems that actually move funds. And Mykola, you are interacting with a lot of businesses, investors, and companies across various industries, right? So where do you see most companies today in this range? And when realistically does the third one will be arriving at scale?
Yeah, I would say that what I see in quantum computing, I've seen already several times across my career, at least. So I used to work in the deep tech, basically growing a deep tech team, working across different types of areas, like from embedded computing to embedded AI to biotech and finally quantum computing. And for example, the same kind of process I've seen like in AI when it just started, like when we just got the first advantages of using deep learning systems, and then we slowly started to navigate towards understanding how to use those deep neural network systems in actual practical applications. The same happened in blockchain. So there was a huge rush about like proof of concepts in blockchain, and then people navigated towards narrow number of use cases where it actually makes sense to use it. So currently we see more or less the same process in quantum computing. I would say that we are in the early stage of this process because unlike AI and unlike blockchain that I witnessed, we are still even on the early stage from the point of view technology development, because technology is less mature. It does not provide like huge value or like huge advantage even in those niche applications. But the pace of development of this technology is actually very fast. So we may actually witness transition much faster. And in comparison to what we had, for example, in AI, it took almost 15 years to get where we are today with AI. And in that sense, I think like most of the companies are actually in the area of piloting and running proof of concepts. That's just the nature of things. But I would say I would recommend enterprises start exploring this field now, because building the use case, it does not happen overnight. Finding the right use case, it does not happen overnight. So you need to understand how this technology maps to your particular business. What are tough mathematical and computer science problems that probably you cannot efficiently solve today? And then having those use cases, having that knowledge, start building capabilities and building basically internal understanding, like which algorithms match to which use case, such that when quantum computing transition will happen, you will already be armed in immediately getting to the advantage in your particular industry faster. Because otherwise you will spend another 2 years to do that, and you will be behind your competitors. So I would recommend at least start a small scale quantum program as soon as possible. On the other hand, if we are talking about can we extract any value today, that's a very tough question, because for any innovation program, if you start it in an enterprise, it goes through the typical cycles. First, you invest, you build prototypes, and then you navigate which prototypes work, and then you start scale and commercializing those. This is much harder in quantum computing because you can build a number of cool prototypes which potentially can solve specific hard challenges in your business. But unless we have scalable quantum hardware and fault-tolerant quantum hardware, some of these applications are just not accessible. And that's kind of a trade-off that many of the companies currently facing, because you start a quantum program, but then you need to prove the values to the business somehow. And here is where we come in as a Haiqu, as a company. On one hand, so we try to help these teams to extract the most value from existing quantum hardware as possible, and try to at least get to this regime of being on par with classical methods. So once you are there, and once you have deep intuition of how it works on hardware, in principle, you can make a step back and run some of these workflows using simulated backend, at least in the first stages of this process of adopting quantum computing. And that's potentially already works in some narrow use cases. So we, even like interacting with our customers, we already see that, for example, we can do quantum data loading on the quantum computer. We can actually get interesting areas of anomaly detection and machine learning, where this kind of quantum embedding of the data works better than classical methods. On the other hand, we still can simulate that regime perhaps with the standard classical simulators. So this is essentially a classical regime right now. So what we can do, we can still take the same pipeline, run it in a standard HPC setting, and plug it within the larger machine learning pipelines, but using that specific niche layer as potentially switchable to a quantum computer. So that's one of the potential direction where teams can move when they need to prove value to the business already today.
And I guess you are coming closer to my next question, as I wanted to focus a lot about the software layer itself, because we need, as an audience, to understand better like what actually that means, right? So can you please walk us through on what this software layer is doing between kind of an enterprise and the quantum computer, and what problems it solves that the hardware on its own cannot?
Right. So my personal view on the quantum computing today is that we are more or less in 40s or early 50s of where classical computers have been. So we have these very complicated machines, very gentle machines, I would say, because like as they're very susceptible to noise, to environmental conditions, and so on. So they don't work. They are not very stable. They need to be calibrated, and that's reminds me what happened in classical computer in the early stages. So we had this large tube-based machines, which didn't work as well, as stable, and moreover, they didn't have error correction in the first stages. And you had really to hire rare talents who knew how to operate these machines, who knew how to fix bugs. And sometimes if you wanted to run some applications, you needed to run it like multiple times before you actually had it executed in the correct way without bugs. So that's exactly the regime in which we are today. So if you want to run something on the quantum computing, good luck. So most likely, if you don't know tips and tricks of the execution stack on the quantum computer, your application will just produce noise. And the challenge here is that it's not only about like taking your favorite classical algorithm and run it on a quantum computer. First of all, it does not work in this way. So you need to develop your quantum algorithm. Then once you develop the quantum algorithm, from the algorithmic perspective, you need to find the optimal way to execute it on the quantum hardware, and that requires running through multiple layers of abstraction. For example, you need to compile it to a specific set of gates or a specific topology of qubits. You need then to apply so-called noise tailoring techniques, error mitigation techniques, error suppression techniques, before you actually get any useful result from it. So combining all those techniques is very non-trivial. And even if you can find some of the open source methods here and there in the parts of the stack, stitching them together is already very non-trivial. So there is basically no tools on the market which allow you to do that. And that's where we came from. So when we started Haiqu, first of all, we built a method which allowed us to run, to execute algorithms much more efficiently by efficiently reducing number of gates needed to execute algorithm. On the other hand, when we started to stitch this with the rest of the stack, we realized that there is nothing to work with. So we built the necessary infrastructure, which allows us to build complicated so-called middleware stacks of those low-level tools. So now we can build those stacks automatically of any complexity. So that combines characterization of the noise of device, error suppression, error mitigation, various types of quantum compilation, and altogether that on each of the components we get on par or better performance than state of the art. But when we combine multiple methods like that, we get actually significantly forward in comparison to what else you can get on the market. So with that perspective, my general view is that today we are in the early stage of the quantum hardware development, and software is playing a extremely important role to execute something on the hardware. Basically, this is very similar to what early operating systems did for classical computers, democratizing the access and the way we program classical computers, or, for example, what CUDA did for GPUs, when you can now run different scientific and high-performance computing applications on the graphical processing units, which was not that convenient when these processing units were introduced. So our stack basically does the same for quantum. So for a user of our system, it's as easy as just selecting the right stack, and the system automatically adjusts the right parameters and stitches together multiple methods.
Yeah, it looks really complex and impressive. So thank you for walking us through on that. And now I want to ask a really important question from the business perspective, right? So it's all about also cost to value decision when we're talking about the enterprise perspective. So quantum hardware is genuinely fragmented along different modality lines, which are superconducting trapped ions like neutral atoms, right? Photonic, and each strong for different problem classes, as far as we know. So from your vantage point, how should enterprise actually think about matching their use cases to the right hardware modality? And what role does software play in that layer so that it helps businesses not to commit too early for a specific architecture?
That's a very good observation. So first of all, that's not a big issue that there are multiple modalities. We've been in the same space with classical computers and multiple modalities of transistors. So it took almost 30 years to actually narrow down to a specific architecture of the transistors that we use today. So that probably will happen in quantum computing, or we will still have multiple quantum computers for different tasks. That's, again, not a problem at all. So right now we have few of the modalities which are performing already, I would say, on the production level, let's say. So when you have not only quantum computer, but also some infrastructure software connecting this quantum computer to a cloud, There is a queue which allows multiple users to access this quantum computer. So this, fortunately, is already there for several vendors. And as a user, you can start working with one or another vendor. However, if you are a company selecting your quantum roadmap, you will end up seeing the challenge. So typically, the stack for one quantum computer is different than the stack for a different modality of a quantum computer. And vendors typically try to build kind of a semi-vertical stack such that to lock customer to their specific architecture. That becomes a bit challenging if you, for example, developed an algorithm of gate-based quantum algorithm, which can actually run across different modalities. So it's very hard actually to switch between them on your own. And again, the infrastructure system, which will be more flexible, which would allow, for example, combining multiple layers, automatically adjusting to a specific modalities, that would be very beneficial for everyone. And partially that's what we already offer to our customers. We integrate basically with any commercially available quantum computer today. And our system automatically, once we onboard this quantum computer to our platform, our system automatically recognizes the topology of the device, its noise profile, and adjusts the middleware stack accordingly to one or another modality, such that you get best performance all the time on whichever platform you want to run. So that's very different from just having access to those computers. So now you have access also to the best performing middleware stack.
But I also want to touch a little bit before we go to specific use cases, the intersection that I believe would define the next milestones in the field, which is quantum and AI. I know that you have released recently a product which is described as the first agentic OS for quantum R&D teams. So let's unpack that a little bit. When you put AI agents in front of quantum computer, what actually changes to quantum engineering team using that?
Right. One of the biggest bottleneck that we see in the industry is that not only the availability of the quantum hardware, but also understanding what to do with it. Mm-hmm. So I would say quantum hardware is available. So if you want to build a quantum program, you have actually opportunities to work with a number of vendors who provide quantum computers of a utility scale already today, and allow you to connect to those quantum computers via cloud. And so that's, let's say, solved. So as a builder of a quantum program, you already can build some partnerships with those quantum hardware vendors. But now becomes the next challenge, which we see over and over and over again. So even when company has identified partners to run the applications on the hardware partners, that's typically the number one selection of these programs. Then they go around their own business and try to identify like what are the use cases. So they identified hundreds of use cases. And now it becomes the challenging part, how to map those use cases to actual quantum algorithms and run them on the quantum hardware. And even if we provide user with an easy way to execute those quantum algorithms on different quantum modalities, we find apparently a lot of companies, they still have a big challenge on understanding which algorithms to build. So they start working with us, having the system allowing to run at the largest scale. They go through tutorials, they actually execute the training program. And then they stuck on the moment when they actually need to select the right use case and select the right algorithm. So we've seen this over and over again. We try to help such customers, basically providing our algorithmic expertise here. And we realized that this bottleneck will be there for a while, and it will even become more severe. There will be higher demand to run something on the quantum computer. And we see that there becomes a challenge of actually hiring quantum experts in different geographies because there are just not enough quantum graduates right now. And what we decided to build, we decided to not just build a single agent. Single agent just doesn't work today in today's reality. So quantum computing is a deep scientific field. And right now, at least at the moment we have this conversation, a LLM on its own, even how good you will prompt it, it will not provide you with an end-to-end quantum application of a quality where it does not have like some silly errors across different physics conventions. But we noticed that we can actually solve this problem differently. So we basically built not a single agent system, but we built a operating system which allows us to decompose the whole quantum application R&D process or generally research process into multiple steps. And each step is its own workflow with multiple agents, which in the end solve specific, very tiny tasks. So we, based on our experience, we actually decompose that process very carefully in the way that each task can be delegated to, let's say, a student of a second grade with a basic knowledge of physics. Such that in the end, when you combine all those agents together, they kind of self-correct each other, and you can also run a bunch of deterministic checks on the orchestrator side, making sure that all the math is correct, all the algorithmic conventions and like interaction protocols between different layers of your algorithm are also correct, such that in the end, we can move from like early vague idea that a customer or researcher provides into articulating this idea step by step into a viable program or application which can be run on the quantum computer. And in this case, I would see it as a two-layer system. So we have our low-level operating system, which allows us to orchestrate low-level middleware components, and we have a higher-level operating system of agents where we orchestrate multiple flows of agents in between. And in that way, the agents build the use case and build the application, and then they use our low-level operating system to execute those applications in the best possible way on actual quantum computers.
And I think with such a breach, we're coming specifically to my favorite part about the use cases. So, Mykola, across the quantum software landscape today, which industry use cases you believe are the closest one to production on today's noisy hardware, and which could transfer from pilot into the operational mode within the next 2 years, let's say?
Right. I just actually want to add to a previous question. So I need to say that the ability to quicker orchestrate those use cases is incredibly valuable. So previously, most of the teams, they spent from 3 months to half a year to a year on building a single use case. So now with this streamlined system, I can actually mint those use cases much faster. So it could be from a couple of days to a week if it's something more complex. And some of the examples that we did internally in our team, for example, there was a PhD grade research project which we were able to execute in a couple of days instead of half a year to a year, which was some of us did, for example, in our own PhD. And I would say that's a dramatic shift for enterprises, because now we can actually start talking to a company in a workshop, ideate which use cases match to which quantum algorithms, and in a couple of days actually produce already the state-of-the-art algorithm which runs on actual real hardware. So that's a game changer,
right? Money to value and value to money.
Yeah. So in that perspective, I think sometimes we don't need to wait actually for a few years even. But in terms of use cases that I see close enough, these are those which in one or another case are naturally exploiting the nature of quantum computers. So in that case, like the condensed matter physics and material physics problems are probably the closest to early advantage. So some quantum dynamics applications, for example, various neutron scattering or electronic spin resonance applications could be already now run on the quantum computer more efficiently than on classical, or maybe more conveniently than on the classical in some narrow use cases. And if we, for example, have some of these workflows in some industries, that's probably where I would look at, for example, some scattering applications and some quantum dynamics applications. Secondly, this is about small molecules or like small materials characterization, like where we have maybe up to 50 atoms or 100 atoms in a molecule or material chunk. That's something, the regime which we potentially can simulate again better or more conveniently on the quantum computer. So these the simulations, that's probably the lowest hanging fruit that I would expect some interesting results to happen soon. A lot of people are focused on optimization problems, and that's potentially is easy to imagine how to apply optimization problem within one or another enterprise domain. But we need to be honest here that that optimization is also beaten to death in some sense by classical methods, because that was a very important problem for classical methods. So we have like a very tough competition with the classical methods. So it's always when we have any advantage results announced in the optimization domain, we almost immediately have another result of the same problem beaten by classical methods. So I would probably be a little bit more careful with optimization problems here. And what we also noticed recently on our side is that potentially quantum embedding of the data or quantum machine learning, but in the way of tackling a very complex types of data, not large data sets or not like typical classical machine learning problems, but machine learning problems where the data is almost random and very hard to tackle with classical machine learning techniques. That's kind of a sweet spot where potentially quantum embeddings of this data could help, because in quantum space, as you embed your data into quantum state, that state effectively lives in the much larger dimensionality, and in that larger dimensionality, there potentially is a possibility to draw a decision boundary to separate different classes of data if it's a classification problem. So in that space, we already seen several, I would say, cute examples. It was a healthcare and financial problems where the data sets were very hard to tackle by classical machine learning problems, very hard to tackle by humans because they were almost random, very hard to interpret. But they eventually it was eventually possible to use quantum machine learning to embed this data into a quantum state, process it on a quantum computer, then read it back into classical state, and then continue processing it on the classical computer. And in that case, we kind of seen improvement in the result.
Right. And I know that you are running a lot of research collaborations with such companies as HSBC, BMO, Gemini, Deloitte, right? And looking across all that experience, what are the major patterns you can observe, like from the business perspective as well? Like what enterprises that get value right now from quantum do differently from the enterprises that end up with no further decisions, for instance?
In terms of our partners, so I would say all of them are very careful and cautious about where the quantum computing is today. They are very sober, I would say. And that actually is helpful when you build your quantum program. So you don't oversell and increase the expectations from the stakeholders in the enterprise. We need to understand that this is an early stage technology. It's extremely promising, but we cannot expect too much too soon.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that what I see in those patterns, it's actually it's very exciting, because on one hand, most of this research is in the level of early prototyping and pushing the frontier of where quantum algorithms are in terms of runnability on the quantum hardware, and what are the constraints, resulting constraints for business applications which we get by running on the hardware today and on the future hardware in 5 to 10 years from now. And having those constraints, you can then go to your catalog of use cases and understand, okay, there's like 20 use cases which match those constraints and can be executed maybe already this year or next year. And so it's a process of technology push in some sense. So instead of having your favorite use case and application in a specific industry, it's important at this stage to understand that this is not yet a fully developed technology. So you cannot apply here a standard marketing R&D approach where you have a market demand and then you select the technology. So here is an early application of the technology. So we need to understand what are our limitations and what use cases and what applications in the specific vertical match those limitations. And with partners which we work today, we already explore a bunch of use cases across different kind of industries. For example, in finance, we explored what limits us from running, for example, quantum Monte Carlo applications, the simulations of derivatives pricing. And you can spend enormous amount of time of building your best quantum Monte Carlo algorithm, but if you can't prepare the initial state of that simulation, that will just not be runnable on any time soon on near-term devices or even early fault-tolerant devices, because you will end up with such large number of operations that will be just not possible. And in this particular exploratory phase, we understood that, okay, we can build much more compact representation of initial state, and in general, that actually spreads different types of data that we can prepare in a more compact way. And this allowed us to then also optimize the Monte Carlo algorithm and then find the better conditions in which we can run it. And now we reduced the amount of operations and we found a better constraint scenario in which we can apply that in practice. It's not applicable today, honestly, on the large scale for practical applications, but we already navigated when we could be able to run this on a quantum computer. With another application, for example, we explored which small molecules we can simulate on today's computer. And we already are quite confident that we can do this quite efficiently on the bunch of small molecules materials, and also materials where the unit cell can be represented with like relatively compact number of qubits. And again, this is a specific constraint scenario that we have. Now we can go to a life science company or to energy company and look for use cases where they need to simulate those small molecules or need to simulate some quantum cluster in some of their larger scale methods more efficiently than a classical computer. So this process we see over and over and over again across those advanced partners that we engage with. I would say that's harder. It's harder to start engaging with someone completely fresh to quantum computing often, because you need to educate them, those customers, and you need to slightly lower their expectations, because typically, because of overhyping within marketing, a lot of people from innovation units who might not be that deep into quantum computing, they may feel that quantum computing is already here at a large scale and we can solve anything similarly as we do with AI. We are on a slightly lower level of maturity of the technology.
Makes sense. And Mykola, let's close today's discussion with a capital question, which most quantum conversation could skip. So we know that Haiqu has raised about $15 million, right? And this is the market where VCs are convinced that quantum is still emerging technologies. So my question would be, what did you have to prove to your investors to pass this skepticism, right? And being convinced to invest in it? So maybe you can highlight your insights on what investors are looking for now on making their decisions.
I would say quantum computing is early stage technology, and this is a very standard deep tech scenario. So it's a high risk for investors, like extremely high risk. And if you are looking for like immediate high reward, or like soon, more or less relatively soon high reward, so it's probably easier to invest in AI startup or like some SaaS startup. On the other hand, if quantum computing works, it promises much higher rewards to those early stage investors. And because of the complexity of the technology, there are also not as many competitors in this space. Like on the software side, there are companies which you can count on the fingers, basically, of your hands. On the hardware side, quite similar. So there are smaller startups in Europe, US, or Southeast Asia, but again, it's not a gigantic market, actually. So those who will manage to deliver the technology and will manage to scale it once quantum computing will happen as a market, once there will be a strong proof of advantage, and everyone will be jumping in to find their particular use case for application. There will be lack of hardware platforms. There will just be a huge demand on running something on the hardware. There will be a huge demand for efficient software systems, and there will be a huge demand for application layer of building those applications and scaling those. And that's where we aim for, and that's basically our story. So it's not only about allowing you to run something in the best possible way on today's quantum hardware. That's indeed our extremely good value proposition for anyone who works in the quantum computing. You can literally run something on the state-of-the-art level almost out of the box. But our system is already future-proof. So the same infrastructure which allows us to orchestrate the middleware components is absolutely the same infrastructure which would allow us to orchestrate different layers and code structures for fault-tolerant quantum computing stack. And that's the same infrastructure which would allow us to orchestrate interaction and communication between different quantum programs. So in that sense, this is a scalable model of operating system. That's why we call it already now Haiqu operating system. So today we are operating management of the low-level programs, but in the future, as the field will mature, there will be management and orchestration of actually true user-built quantum programs. And that's the story that we are telling, and that basically makes us easily scalable as soon as this field will pick up its momentum.
Right. Well, Mykola, thank you so much. That was a fantastic conversation, which we need more in quantum, right? Honest about timing, use cases, and what actually enterprise are getting from quantum right now.
Thank you.
Yeah, and for all of audience that was watching us, put your thoughts in comments, what insights you got out of today's discussions, and I'll see you soon in the next episode.
Thank you, Ola.